Hello, everyone. It's an Angular Minsk meetup, and it's very special meetup, as you can probably hear it. I'm speaking English today, and there is a reason for that. So first of all, it's Angular Minsk first anniversary. So yeah, we just turned 1 year, which is a big date for us. And it's a great milestone. Over this time, we had 16 meetups, so that's meetup number 16. We have 36 different talks and 23 speakers for different countries. Also, I should mention that about one third of speakers were actually first-time speakers. So the ones who we give a bit of support and help to prepare their first talk. All that was possible thanks to our co-organizers and friends. And if you want to volunteer or be part of our organizers team to help rehearsing the speakers' materials or to help with anything else, yeah, just get in touch with us. Also, I want to thank to Event Space who help us to organize all our offline meetups. So thank you guys a lot. And thank you everyone who attended our meetups all this time. Our audience is the best. Thank you guys. So yeah, that's our birthday today. And today we have awesome prizes from our partners, JetBrains and Quokkajs. Everyone heard of JetBrains, right? But you might wonder, what is Quokkajs? Quokkajs is a developer productivity tool for rapid JavaScript and TypeScript prototyping. You can check more details on quokkajs.com. So the authors of the best question will receive a license to JetBrains, and Quokkajs license will be shuffled after the meetup in our Telegram channel during next 24 hours or something like that. We had two awesome guests today, Tomas Trajan, who coming all the way from Switzerland. He remote. It's an online meetup, but still, it's cool. So to have someone from Switzerland, he's actually GDE, which means Google Developer Expert. So he speak about microfrontends with Angular. And then Minko from Angular team will join us on a Q&A panel where we will discuss the future of Angular and we'll answer all our questions. We have the list of questions actually prepared by our community. So yeah, we will go through each question today. Yeah, I already talked about that. And yeah, so join us on media channels. And soon we planning to organize a RxJS workshop. So yeah, stay tuned. If you want to be a speaker, just follow this URL. Don't try to type it in your browser. We'll put a link to that Google form in a meetup description. So yeah, I want to. And yeah, basically, also I want to mention that today you can ask any questions for our speakers on a prefixing the question with Q and question mark. So what else? Yeah, that's pretty much all. So I want to invite to the stage Tomas. Hey, Tomas, how are you going?
Hi, everyone. Nice. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, welcome to Meetup. If you remember, last year I was trying to invite you to our normal Meetup, but yeah, it didn't work. So we didn't find a way to do it. And today you are actually made your way to our Meetup in the form of virtual event. which is really, really cool. We really pleased to have you with us today.
Thank you very much, Alexej. Thank you for the introduction. So, milé dámy a páni, dobrý večer. Vítajte pri ďalšom dieli Minsk meetup. But I will also switch to English. So today we are going to speak about the surprisingly easy way to build microfrontends with Angular. And basically not just that, but also like about the easy way to consume Angular elements and any other kinds of web components in the Angular applications. Alexej already gave me a little bit of introduction, but let me quickly recapitulate. So my name is Tomas Trajan, and I'm a Google developer expert for Angular. And professionally, I'm currently working as a contractor/consultant with various enterprise organizations in Switzerland. Besides that, I am speaking at various meetups and conferences and lead Angular workshops and with focus on like stuff like basics, reactive forms, or state management around the Europe. Of course, all of you are interested in Angular because you are part of the Angular Minsk meetup group. So you might be also interested in my Medium blog about the Angular at medium.com/@TomasTrajan, where you can find many interesting articles of various levels. So like for the entry, like beginner stuff, up all the way up to the advanced stuff, and learn from that. Besides that, if you are yourself writing on the Medium, you might be interested in Medium Enhanced Stats Chrome extension, which basically gives you much better stats of your Medium articles compared to that ones provided out of the box by the Medium. Also, if you are just starting with the Angular, you might be interested in Angular NGRX Material Starter GitHub project, where you can learn like some about best practices, how to use Angular, how to use Angular Material Component Framework, how to manage your state with NGRX, write tests, write custom themes. It has more than 30 community contributors, and it's pretty popular with more than 2,200 stars. So feel free to check it out. People use it basically to build their own applications, and then they send links like of what they created. It's pretty cool. And last but not least, if you are on Twitter, you might be interested in Release Butler, which is basically a Twitter bot which tweets change logs of the popular front-end frameworks and libraries like Angular, React, RxJS, and NGRX whenever there was a new version. And if you are a library author yourself, you may check the website where you can basically download nicely styled screenshots of changelogs of your own library to use it on your website or in your blog post. So that's for the introduction. Now let me quickly tell you like basically about how it's structured. So basically the topic is a bit advanced, I would say, and because of that, the first half would be kind of like a refresher of the topics which are kind of on the way to our main topic. So we will refresh those concepts and build up like some context to discuss then the final topic itself. Just a sec. Right. Okay, so basically in the beginning, like long time ago before AngularJS, we had the vanilla web, right? People were building websites and maybe they sprinkled like a little bit of interactivity on that website by including like some script file or like even like an inline script where they had to imperatively get hold of like some buttons or elements and then add some listeners and do some stuff. And of course, this didn't really scale well. It led to a lot of spaghetti code, and we were not really speaking about the web applications yet. It was more like web with a little bit of functionality. But people and community wanted to create like a real web applications, and because of that, they basically created a lot of community-driven front-end frameworks and libraries. And as it turned out over time, the main concept of which they all converged to were components, right? So the components were created with the help of those front-end frameworks and libraries like AngularJS, React, Ember, and so on. So what do we mean when we speak about the components? So components, in comparison with something like a paragraph, which is the HTML tag, can provide us with more things. So let's compare them. So paragraph can show us some text. Maybe it can use some styling, and maybe it even can be animated using some CSS animation. Compared to that, something like a to-do item, which is kind of like this archetypical component because most of the front-end frameworks and libraries show off their main demo as a to-do list, can do all these things, of course, but besides that, it can do much more. You would say that the possibilities are like limitless, right? So the to-do item can be toggle bar, maybe we can assign it to a user, maybe we can implement some deadline functionality, maybe we can tag those to-do items or anything else which comes to our mind, right? So the components are inherently more powerful compared to just like the vanilla HTML tags provided out of the box. And this is very useful. So the good things about the component is that they are usually reusable. That means once we implement this kind of to-do item, we can use it in multiple parts of our application without needing to re-implement this functionality over and over again. That means it encapsulates this kind of functionality and hides this implementation detail, so it reduces the complexity of the application by taking the complexity inside of itself. But the disadvantages of using this framework and library-specific components are that, yeah, they are framework and library-specific, and because of that, they are usually not reusable across projects which use different technology than the one in which we implemented it, right? And this basically led to people re-implementing the same things over and over again across like every new technology which popped out. And as you for sure, or some of you remember, frontend had a pretty turbulent period not so long time ago when there was like this running joke that there is like a new frontend framework almost every week, right? So, and this was the reason why people came up with this idea like, okay, we really like components. It really makes sense. I mean, it existed even before the front-end development itself in other languages. It's very powerful, but we have this problem that, yeah, once we implement it using this custom technology, we cannot really reuse it that well, right? And this was the starting premise, I think, of the web components. And here will be like some code examples, but don't really focus on them so much. It's not about the implementation here. It's more like about the high-level overview of these concepts. So with the web components, we usually speak about the JavaScript classes which extend HTML element or some other HTML element. And this implementation then can be registered in the browser under some custom tag. And once it's done, and if we include such a file in our browser, we can start using this new custom component as any other HTML element, right? Now, so this is pretty nice, but it can get crazy or nasty pretty fast. The main problem with the web components is that it uses pretty low-level vanilla DOM APIs, which leads to various problems like manual management of the props and attributes, where you have to reflect them there and back, or that you have to manually attach like event handlers in the lifecycle hooks, which can easily lead to problems with the memory leaks, and that by default you can only pass in primitive values like strings or numbers into attributes and nothing complex like objects or arrays, and various different problems, which leads us, or not yet, but I mean, so okay, there are some problems, but of course the web components have these advantages that they are more reusable, because as they are native to the browser, basically anything which runs in this modern browser, any kind of framework, could in theory be able to use these web components as the UI components, right? And that means that they are framework independent because they use these native APIs, and they can even provide better encapsulation with stuff like Shadow DOM. And in theory, we can say that they could represent like the future-proof way of implementing stuff like from UI libraries to even like some bigger components which you could keep reusing as the technologies come and go, right? So this is nothing new. Most people which are probably listening to this already heard about these concepts. Now, the same pattern repeats again. We started like with some simple JavaScript, and then we came up with the libraries and frameworks to be able to write like higher level code, which is nicer to write and better developer experience. Similarly, with the web components, again, we most likely do not want to write this low level code, and we want to employ some library or framework, for example, like Angular Elements, to write it and then get the end result, which is a plain web component. So Angular Elements, aka write Angular and get vanilla web components. So again, the code doesn't really matter right now, but basically an Angular element is an Angular application which contains some components, and then with the help of a library called Angular/elements, which provides us with this create custom element helper function, we can pass in that component class, and the library will basically provide kind of like a bridge between the native APIs and the custom Angular APIs, and wraps this component as a custom element, which we then can pass into the native custom element define and register it with some tag, as we would do with the standard web components, which are like vanilla. Right. So, and then the way we use it again is that we will most likely build this Angular element into a single bundle. Angular doesn't provide this out of the box, but this can be easily achieved with some third-party builders, like for example, NGX Build Plus provided by Manfred Steyr, which enables us to build the whole Angular element into a single file. So this can be a bundle like this. And once this bundle is included, we can start using that custom web component built with Angular element in our application. That means in the HTML template, or also in any template of other Angular components if it's like a consumer Angular application. So this is like the intro. So those are all the concepts which we need to then discuss further topics in this presentation. So as we said, web started like with some simple vanilla websites which use some vanilla JavaScript. Then community realized that it would be nice to have components, but they were not really reusable. So they came up with web components, and then again, like the history repeated itself, that we want to use like some higher level approach to author these web components. Now, a little bit of story time of how this use case came to be. So currently I am working like a large insurance enterprise in Switzerland, and when I joined them, their current situation was that they had this huge monolithic AngularJS application with more than, I think, like 20 teams working on it. For some reasons, they chose like the ng router, the official one, and not like the UI router. So everything was like eagerly loaded. There was no lazy loading. And as you can imagine, like the situation got out of hand eventually with all these people working on this single code base. It was really hard to add additional features or like make fixes or just even like move forwards, let's say. And because of that, they decided to split this huge monolith, and they did it successfully, and they split it in more than 100 Angular single page applications of the new Angular for the time being with the ng upgrade. And this was pretty cool because now every of those teams, instead of like working like and stepping on each other's toes, could work on a couple of applications which only belong to them with their own dedicated deployment cycle and like release cycle and all these kind of things. So they got a lot of flexibility, but this approach came with its own set of disadvantages. And the main disadvantage was that even though we have like 100 applications and they kind of look the same because they represent like one system for one company, they often wanted to use like some functionality which was shared across many of them. So let's say we have 100 applications, and in 50 of them, we need this special component, let's call it document manager, which shows you contextual document based on insurance case for like the employee to work with, right? So the standard approach to do this with Angular is to create a library which implements the components and the services. And this library is then included on reference from all those consumer applications through the package.json with the version. And then, of course, when these applications are installed and built, they get this library and they use it, right? But what happens if we have a new version of such a library? So in this, if we solve it like this, it gets pretty complicated, because when we release a new version of library, let's say 3.10, what has to happen is quite a lot. We have to propagate this new version. We have to have some like way to notify all these consumer application that there was a new version, and we have to propagate that new version. And not only that, these applications have to be basically rebuilt, re-released, and redeployed into production. And only then we would have like the same version of this library running in all those applications. And of course, we are not living in the ideal world, so this is usually not the case. So even though we strive for stuff like continuous deployment and delivery, it's usually never perfect, and there is always this one or two outlier applications which just release on different cadence, which can be like once a month compared to like 3 times a day for most of them, right? So and this leads to this problem that we have multiple versions of a library in a production, which can lead to various bugs. It can be like API between the usage of a component with the inputs and outputs. It can be like that library tries to reach some API in the backend, which is not compatible anymore. So this led to quite some problems. So what we wanted to do is to be able for library to decide when and how it releases itself. So kind of like as if like an inversion of control, that the library itself decides when it's the time to release it, and all the applications would preferably just get the latest version immediately when the library was released. And we realized that this can be easily achieved with the web components, or in our case, because we have an Angular library with Angular elements, which are built into web component. And in that case, basically, we have this library, it's an element, then we have a new version, we build it, and we deploy this single file bundle on some URL. And once it's deployed, it can be something like my organization document manager / bundle.js. All these consumer applications only reference that library by that URL. Now, stuff like cache busting is handled with the help of e-tags, because we cannot have like a hash in a file name as is usually the case. But there is this thing called e-tags, which basically works the same, but it uses HTTP headers instead of file names. So then all that is necessary for all those consumer applications to receive the newest version of that element is basically to refresh the page, because as they refresh the page, or basically navigate away and back to that route, as you reinitialize that consumer component which tries to use that element, it will download the latest version of the element from that URL and use it straight ahead. So this is like the main use case which we encountered like in practice. Now, what are some other use cases? So this first use case, I call it kind of like a sub-application. So let's say it's like a document manager. So it's not like you have a button, an avatar, or a card, but it's something bigger. Then another use case can be that we have like a full microfrontend solution. So instead of like having application which just consumes some small part of UI, which is shared across many applications, we can have like application which is basically just an empty shell, which provides only like a couple of infrastructure functionality, and the whole UI is actually collection of those sub applications, right? Another use case could be like being able to lazy load some heavy third-party component, which is more like a technical in its nature, so not business nature. So this can be, for example, something like a rich text editor. And besides that, it's not the best use case for like a components library. So again, like I would not build something like Angular material using Angular elements yet. I think the Minko can say more about that, like how it will look like in the future. Now, and because we have this use case, I created this library called like Angular extensions elements, which basically enables us to do these things in much better way. So now you might be asking yourself, like, you show like that elements just work like out of the box. So why is there a library, right? So the thing is that by default, if we don't use the library, we have two options. The first option is we have to include the element bundle before we start our Angular application so that it's available. So basically that the custom element is registered and available before the Angular starts. That means it's eagerly loaded. And if we do it, we can then just use it as any other Angular component or HTML element using standard Angular template bindings in our other components, which is good. But the problem is, it's eagerly loaded. That means if we have more than one or a couple of them, it can really negatively impact our startup time. So this is something which we definitely do not want. The second option would be to lazy load this element using something like creating a script tag where we can pass in the element bundle URL. And then once it was loaded, we could do like some imperative binding of the attributes and events. But again, this is something we do not really want to do because we use Angular to use these nice template bindings and like these high-level concepts. So we definitely do not want to write this kind of imperative code whenever we want to use this kind of elements. So what we actually want is to be able to have it lazy loaded and use it using standard Angular template bindings. So we would want something like this. We want to use it in the template of our component. So for example, here we have this sum component, which is an element. And we want to use standard template binding. So we pass in some data and receive like some update events. And we want it to be lazy loaded. And this is where the library comes into place by providing us with the *AX lazy element directive, which does exactly that. So it lazy loads it, and it enables us to use standard template binding. So how does it work? So quickly about that. So basically, this is a shorter version of this presentation, so we will not go into technical details, but we will just go through the high-level overview on how it works. So basically, the directive is marked with the star, which means it's a structural directive, which means that the element is removed from the DOM initially, which is good because we don't yet have the implementation, right? It should be lazy loaded. And the directive also get access to the element template, which can be injected into constructor. So that means that once we, behind the scenes, load the element bundle and register it in the browser, we can use this template reference to basically put the element back into the Angular component template, and it just starts working. So that's like the higher level overview. Again, we don't have to dwell into details. I think like Alexei will then share the presentation and you can see it for yourself. Now, this also works with Angular Ivy. I know like Angular Ivy is still like it's not that new anymore, but many people still opt out for various reasons. So just to let you know that this is like future compatible. Now, we said it's lazy, but how lazy it actually is. So we just used it there like in a template, but that means like, okay, it loads it when we navigate to that component. So that means if we navigate to the route, then only then we will load this component, which is kind of nice, but I think we can do better. So let's imagine a situation where we have this component, but wrap it with the div which has an ngIf on it, and it only renders when we click on a button. So again, we are not in person, so I cannot really ask you what you think, but think it for yourself, what will happen. And I guess you guessed correctly that it will only load this once the ngIf evaluates to true. That means it really gives you like a very granular way to lazy load small chunks of your UI, and all you need to do is basically hide it behind ngIf or any other directive like ngFor, and as long as it's not rendered, it will not trigger requests to load the element bundle, which is like very lazy and very granular, which is a very nice feature. So yeah, it's as lazy as it gets, one would say. Now, what about the developer experience? So the library comes with the possibility to pre-configure it like inside of the module, so we can pass in some config, including stuff like loading component, which is displayed during the loading, and error component, which is displayed if the loading of the bundle fails. And if we register like this, which is all documented in documentation, which I will show in the end, then only thing we need to do is basically put in the directive and use it like this. So we don't have to specify anything special. So it's a very nice developer experience. It is still possible to override all these things if necessary in the template. So it's very flexible. Now, so back to our requirements. So as we said, we have like these many applications which use this document manager, want to use this element or like the library. But if we would do it with the element and we want to lazy load it, all we have to do is pre-configure it in some module, put in the directive, and that's it. From the point of view of the developer, he can use it the same way as any other Angular component, which I think is a pretty nice feature. Now, this is really nice, but those are not really microfrontends, right? Because we are still committing to what it will be. We still had to say that this is a document manager and not something like random. And this was the most of the feedback from the community who is already using this library. They were like, this needs to be more dynamic. I would like to load the config from backend and then like apply it during runtime. I would like to configure the tag using a variable. I don't want to commit that it's a document manager or like task list. I want to decide at the runtime. And basically, we want to use this to build microfrontends. So I was like, okay, let's try. So it is possible. The library comes also with the AX lazy element, kind of like placeholder element, and AX lazy element dynamic directive, into which we can pass in the tag which should be used to render that element once it was loaded. And this leads to some nice properties that it is basically possible to retrieve all this configuration from some backend during the runtime, and then we can just iterate over this configuration and render any kind of elements and bind them, and everything just works. So it's really very, very flexible. And it works also with Ivy out of the box, which was a bit crazy. And there, thanks to Rob Wormold, which gave me some pointer at the GD Summit about how this can be solved. Now, what about the monorepos? Couldn't this be solved, like at least part of it with the monorepos? There was this kind of question before. So let's say the sub-application use case. Yes, it could, of course, but again, it depends, right? So if you have like 10 applications and 3 libraries, then this will scale for you also with something like Narwhal NX without needing like special infrastructure like they have in Google, which Minko again can provide more detail on, that you have like that you check out only one folder from your whole monorepo and work on that, and then you cache all the build artifacts. But I think this is a bit out of scope of many organizations. But if you can go for it, and I would definitely go for it for the sub-application use case, in case you are like developing some in-house product and you have like up to 20, 30 things that like you can pull this off, then you will never have this problem with the unmatching version in a production. But again, that's only this one use case. And if you would like to build microfrontends, these libraries can still be of use for you. What about known issues? I mean, we are a bit late of time, so we will not spend much on this, but basically there was one issue with the Zone.js if the consumer was Angular application and the element or the web component was Angular element. There is a workaround of sharing ng-zone from parent and child by hanging it on the window. There will be a link which describes it in the more detail if you are interested. So quick demo time. So basically, this is the documentation website of the library, and here are many examples. So let's start with something simple, and let's refresh just to be sure. So here we want to load like material web component icon from the unpackage.com, which is basically a website which exposes npm packages as a URL, which is very nice. And the point is that this is hidden behind ngIf, and it only should start loading when I click on run. And as you can see, only when I clicked on run, it started loading all these files. You may ask yourself, why so many files? The reason for this is not distributed as a bundle, but as an ECMAScript module, so they are referencing each other. And as you can see, the web component arrived. Now, what about material button? It's loading, and it even shows like some loading template for the time being. And once it's there, as we can see, we can use it, right? Now, what about passing in of complex objects and arrays instead of like primitives? This is I think, distributed as a bundle, and it's some inc charts, like some web components. So again, let's load this. And once it's loaded, as we can see, we can easily bind it the same way as we would normally in Angular, any other component, it just works. And before finishing, let me show you this dynamic case. So here, basically, we don't say it's material web component button, but we say it's AX lazy element, and we just say it should be rendered as a material web component button once it's loaded. So let's see what happens. We put it here, and as we can see, we can even do these kind of things. And when we check how it's rendered, we will see it's a material web component button and not AX lazy element. And finally, the last one, this one loads couple of configs from the backend, let's say, for our example, and then basically iterates through them and renders multiple different elements. And as we can see, we have various different elements. And if we explore the template, we will see that this is a wired button from some other library, and we still have a material web component icon and a button, and everything just works. Cool. So if you want to learn more, I highly recommend you to check the Angular Elements documentation, the library docs itself, web component documentation, MDN. And if you are interested in that ng-zone issue, you can check it. It was documented on Angular repository. Feel free to get in touch. I think Alexei will share this presentation anyway, so you can click all these links, or you can install me in your console. And if your console is nice, then you can probably even directly click on the links to open those URLs to get in touch. So what are the main takeaways? So I would really like to underline that there are really many real-world use cases in real-world organizations where you can solve this using this kind of approach and really provide some value for the business and for your users. And it is also possible to implement like microfrontends with Angular. So, or let's put it that way, that Angular can be a great choice as a shell application for your microfrontend solution because of this approach, right? Because you can easily consume many different sub-applications implementing various different technologies. And I would be very happy if you check out the library. Thank you for your attention. So,
hey Thomas, thanks a lot for great presentation. That was really awesome. Hey guys, just want to remind you it's an Angular Minsk first anniversary. So yeah, it's our birthday today, 1 year. And so we please ask questions, and the best question will receive the JetBrains 1 year license, and then we will shuffle the Quokka personal license, I think tomorrow, in our Telegram channel. And now I want to invite Minko to our discussion, but before that, let's see if there is any questions for Thomas. Okay, Minka is here. Hello, Minka. How is going?
Hello. Good.
Mike.
Nice to see you.
Mike. All right, cool. So yeah, let's start our panel discussion. And Minka joining us from. Minka, where are you at the moment?
I'm currently in Bulgaria, in Sofia.
Right. Cool. Yeah, I was surprised actually. I was thinking he is gonna join us from US, which he's usually based. But yeah. So
yeah, I'm working remotely for some time. It's
right.
I don't know how much time yet because I'm trying to fit into Pacific time zone, so it's usually between around like 5 p.m. to 3 a.m. or so. So we'll see how long this is going to work out.
oh,
Right, that's cool. So yeah, looking forward for all the answers today. We have 16 questions so far for Minka, and we have a few questions for Thomas. So let's start from Thomas' questions. That's first question. How would you compare your approach with Webpack 5 Federation?
Okay, so Webpack 5 Federation is like this new upcoming thing, which is just being developed right now and explored like in detail by some very clever guy. I forgot the name, like on Twitter, he's very active. And I think it's more like complementary. So once you use, let's say, Angular elements, and if you have multiple elements, you get this problem that basically every element brings its own Angular core, let's say, at least. And Webpack 5 Federation can solve this by sharing this kind of vendor dependencies across multiple things which you use in a single context, in a single web page, as far as I understand, right? Of course, this probably then can be later extended even to sharing of like business modules, let's say. But again, it's a very new upcoming thing. So yeah, I think time will tell what are the best use cases for this. If we will do it like more like on the business level, or this will just sink into infrastructure of sharing the vendor stuff, and we will just reap the benefit like this.
Right. Okay, thanks for the answer. Next one. What about Angular element size? Okay, I think this question for Minka. Let's come back to this question later. There is no more questions for Thomas. Guys, if you still want to ask any question, please prefix your question with a Q and then basically a question. So let's start from this question to Minko. So the question is, what are the priorities of Angular team towards version 11 release? And also next 1 or 2 years roadmap and stuff. Is there anything you can share with us, Minka?
Yeah, sure. So first, we have realized that we haven't been too transparent with our roadmap so far. Something that we're planning to do in near future is to share a couple of roadmap items that we're currently working on and what we're planning for the future. I can share a couple of things with you. In general, you know that we have dependency on a lot of different tools coming from the ecosystem, for example, TypeScript. So very highly on our roadmap is making sure that Angular CLI and Angular in general works with TypeScript version 4. This is going to be a breaking change for us since we're using a lot of internal APIs of the TypeScript compiler for both our Angular compiler and for the tooling that comes with the Angular CLI. So this is very high on the roadmap, and this is going to be something that we'll be working on for version 11. Another thing is Webpack version 5. As we already discussed, this is going to bring some improvements around federated modules, but a really large benefit that we see there is related to build time to persistent build cache. So this is going to speed up production builds potentially. And this, again, introduced a lot of breaking changes in the Angular CLI sense to make sure that Webpack is deterministic enough so that we can share we can store the build artifacts on the disk. This means that some plugin APIs will no longer be available and will be deprecated. So we need to adjust to this. We're also really putting a lot of effort right now in reducing the number of open issues. So we're triaging issues really aggressively. And this is consuming maybe about 30 to 40% of our time. And another large effort that we will be even publishing it as an official RFC initiated by our team is moving beyond NGCC. So as you know, probably NGCC is this tool that is bringing the compatibility layer between Angular View Engine, which is Angular version like 8 and before that, and Ivy. So ideally, we would not want to have this NGCC compilation step. So we will be proposing a solution in the upcoming weeks. And so we would actually love to hear your comments. We'll be sharing the design documents, the proposal as an RFC. This is probably going to have mostly impact on library alters. But in general, it is a very interesting design, especially if you're interested in compiler design. This would be really a great place for you to learn new things. And yeah, there are many other things on the roadmap. We know that strict forms has been, stricter typing for forms has been an issue for a while now. This is something that we have prioritized as well, but there are a couple of important things here. We need to plan it well to make sure that it's not a very impactful breaking change. And that's a hard thing to do because, well, just increasing the strictness of forms automatically is going to make some already developed forms invalid. So this is something that requires more planning, but it's definitely really high on the roadmap. When we release the roadmap publicly, you're going to find this somewhere around the top 15 proposals, let's say, or top 5 even. Protractor is very highly on the roadmap as well. And yeah, there are other things that we can discuss over the next questions as well. I'm sure we're going to touch on them.
And speaking about the roadmap, will you be sharing it in the public so everyone can see like what's upcoming next, what's the priorities, or how it's going to work?
Yeah, we'll be working on sharing this. There are you're going to see that there are some things which are directly impacting, like these are features that we're working on directly that would be impacting Angular developers. And there are some things on the roadmap which are just generally addressing problems in our workflow. For example, we would want to improve our versioning and branching design, because currently we have 3 main repos. We have Angular CLI, Angular components, and the Angular monorepo. And they're following slightly different branching strategies, and there are flaws in some of them. So we would want to address this, and this is one proposal that is going through approval by the entire team. I'm hoping us to share this as well, because there are a lot of good learning points there. And yeah, the ultimate goal is to share the roadmap with everyone in some form on Angular.io.
That's cool. That's awesome. Looking forward to that. Okay, let's jump to the next question. Again, this is community questions, so we have 16 of them so far. So we're gonna go through them, and also we will answer any question you guys will ask in the chat. So there is already Rustam ask one question. We'll come back to this one. So yeah, and if you guys want to ask any questions, just go ahead. So the next question is vision to reactive approach versus less non-reactive approach, pros and cons.
So yeah, this is reactive is, I would assume that reactive here you mean using RxJS, because in general, like reactive is a little bit of an overloaded term. In general, it means that we are reacting to changes of the data model when we're updating the view. And well, this is data binding, which even in more imperative Angular, it's still reactive.
Yeah, I think this question is like, I mean, the part of community want to make Angular even more reactive. So we like inputs, they want inputs, reactive inputs, right? They want like to use reactivity where is possible. But this might introduce a barrier, even bigger barrier for newcomers, right? So yeah. So like, what's your opinion on that, and how Angular team might be approaching that in the future?
You actually answered, answered the question really well. It's exactly what you said. Making Angular more reactive would bring RxJS to the critical journey for people who are getting started with Angular, and this may make the framework harder to just get started with. And this is something that we're concerned about. So definitely not on our priority list so far. It is somewhere on the roadmap, but not in something that we'll be working on in near future. There are some good community solutions around that, and they are what I would recommend you to use right now.
Right, but do you think it might be an option, like, like in a Vue, they have like this Vue reactive, so people who want to be reactive, they just plug this package and they can do whatever reactive magic stuff they want. But like, do you think it might be use case for Angular? Like, hey, I want to be reactive, boom, you just, okay, maybe you enable an option, or you maybe install a package, or way around, you might be Angular non-reactive by default, or I mean,
you mean like official but optional?
Yeah. So, like, do you think it might be we having two official approaches, or one approach might be official, another one is community? Like, is there any thoughts on that?
Yeah. In general, I don't think we will be bringing another package to Angular. It's most likely going to be a community package, such as NGRX, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
This is just bringing reactive capabilities to Angular right now. So I'm not expecting us to bring a reactive, like, I'm not expecting us to bring another package which provides two different, which kind of. I see in general two issues with this. The first one is that we'll have to maintain one more package, which is not great. We would want to develop it, and we would want to keep it backward compatible.
Yeah.
And the second thing is that we will not be very consistent in terms of recommendations. Right now, we have some reactivity in Angular, but it's not, again, something that we are officially maintaining and supporting. Although there are great options, and definitely using NGRX, it has its own benefits. This is not, we're not recommending two different journeys, like a more imperative and a more reactive ones. We're in general sticking to a single approach, which makes Angular more opinionated and more consistent across applications.
Maybe like one more to that, like, let's say stuff which is kind of like then confusing, at least like what I experienced like in the practice for many people, let's say like with the interceptors, right? So interceptor has like this intercept method, which is like called imperatively like for every request, but then inside it's kind of like a stream of that particular request. And this can confuse people often because it's kind of like, okay, we have this stream, but it's actually not the stream of requests, because for every request we call a method imperatively and recreate another stream, like this kind of consistency, if there is like some idea or if it's on the radar, let's say. Because I saw this like in the wild, like that this confused people like quite some.
This is a good feedback. This is something we can look at. I wasn't aware of this being an issue actually, so
yeah.
Thanks for bringing it up.
If you had like a stream of requests, which just like every request comes in a stream, then you could apply some stream transfers on it. But because you subscribe for every stream, this leads to problem if you want to cache some stuff which you want to use, like for example in those streams, like to other headers and stuff like this, right?
Yeah. This makes sense. This is HTTP module kind of inconsistent API, I would say. Yeah, this makes sense. Yeah, we have there are a few more examples, I guess, around that. For example,
but there are like stuff like this that it's kind of like imperative call to a stream, which then it's hard because then people try to really use it as a stream, but they don't realize that actually it's a throwaway subscription every time it's called.
Yeah.
You see?
Yeah, if you look at outputs right now, they are also kind of they're subjects in general. So there are certain like they're using RxJS inputs, as Alexei mentioned. On the other side, we don't have such streaming behavior there. There could be an opportunity for like NGRX or any other project just to lift the. I'm sure there are. I've already seen such
There
implementations.
are in NGRX. They have
Yeah.
like they work on these NGRX components. I think it's called like now. Michael Hladky came like with this RX Angular,
Yep.
which is also a very nice approach to this. So yeah, definitely there is like choose from.
Yeah.
All right, let's move up to the next question. It's basically it's like two questions. We probably can ask them into once. So experimental Bazel integration moving out from Angular repo. What are the plans for Bazel plus Angular? And second part of this question, big projects struggling with compile time. Are there any plans for incremental compilation with Angular CLI? And next is the current solution, but maybe it will be possible with Bazel. So, okay, let's start from the first part. Experimental Bazel integration moving out of Angular repo. What are the plans for Bazel plus Angular integration?
Yeah, so originally we were thinking that we might be able to abstract Bazel the same way that we abstract Webpack. And so that you can have a single interface for using like pretty much any build system out there. But Webpack and Bazel, there are quite different systems. Webpack dynamically discovers what it needs to build. It just follows your imports. And it discovers this at build time. And on the other side, we have Bazel, where we have predefined build graph. So Bazel has first a discovery phase where it looks at the build files and it builds an in-memory build graph that it can use in order to determine how it can run the build in parallel. So there are two very different models, and that's pretty much where the main difference is coming from. There is a really great paper called Build Systems a la carte, where they're looking at different build systems. Bazel is one of them. They're looking at Make as well, and even Excel. Excel, I mean the spreadsheet, because to a certain extent, this is again a build system, since it has the same properties. Anyway, you can check the paper out. And Webpack is closer to Excel. It is very dynamic. Bazel is close to Bazel, obviously, to Blaze, which is how we call Bazel internally. And it turns out that abstracting Bazel the way that we're abstracting Webpack is not a good idea. It's not a good idea because this way we kind of hide the build files. And what we did in the Angular CLI at first to make sure that the Angular CLI is consistent between Bazel and Webpack is to generate a single build file for the entire application. And this way, with the single build files, well, we have only a single compilation target. So we cannot run the compilation targets across multiple processes, right? So we cannot take advantage of all the benefits that Bazel comes with. And it wasn't a good approach. A better approach could have been if we were able to generate the build files. This is something that we're partially doing at Google, but still we cannot do it 100% of the times, because sometimes the dependencies across the different modules in the application, they are not obvious. So developers, they still need to define the build graph manually. And in such cases, well, if the Angular CLI is going to be there only to run Bazel build, it probably doesn't make sense to have the Angular CLI there at all, right? It's going to be helping with some scaffolding, but not dramatically, not too much. So that's why we decided to deprecate the Angular/Bazel module and instead allow people to use Bazel the way that we're using it inside of Google, just defining build files themselves. And definitely it works at scale. It works at scale not because Bazel itself is doing something dramatically different. Bazel is able to discover the build graph and the dependencies across your modules with its first pass just by reading the build files. And right after that, it can just schedule parallel builds. And also, because we have these guarantees, Bazel is also able to effectively do disk caching. This is something that Webpack is currently working on. So we hear very frequently that when applications start scaling up, it's the build time becomes a problem. And we are going to evaluate first Webpack 5 to see whether this is going to bring some significant improvements. For sure, this is not going to solve all the problems because I want always my build to be faster. So I would never be satisfied with build speed. But still, I'm hoping it's to decrease the build speed with certain percentage. And yeah, NX is another approach. You can see how NX has different applications and libraries. It is very similar to what Bazel does.
It defines also like these compilation units, right? On its own level, builds its own dependency graph, and then basically tries to do the same thing, just like figuring out what needs to be rebuilt and what can be cached, right?
Yeah, and the main difference is that Bazel does this on a much more granular level, and it works with pretty much like any technology out there compared to NX, which works with larger applications and libraries.
Maybe one question to that. So like, as you said, that basically if you have to then use it like this Bazel, that it kind of doesn't make sense to have CLI anymore because you just have to use Bazel as Bazel. But I still kind of see like potential there, no? Like if it's kind of like hidden at least a bit, because there is like some base config of like, I mean, like you still have to provide like those build files, Bazel build files in your folders. But probably it would be easier if like some base setup was already in place and then you just provided those ones. I don't know. Like
this might be a good example, good opportunity for community schematics or for Bazel schematics.
Yeah.
I'm not confident that the Angular CLI should be providing implementations for any build system out there. We shouldn't be, for example, if someone wants to use Parcel, probably the Angular CLI shouldn't be responsible for having prepack.
Yeah, it's like potential for bugs and problems and issues and
increased maintainability. So
okay. Thanks.
But like, the future is we will get a bit more faster builds, right, with Angular CLI, and also it depends. On the Webpack, and it will also depends on Webpack capabilities as well, right? Capabilities.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we'll first evaluate them, and we see that this problem is common like everywhere. Even inside of Google, people are using Bazel, but even their build. I mean, I would say that in certain cases their build is slower than external builds, depending on the configuration of their build graph.
So what is the most longest build in Google? If you take any ideas?
It depends. It depends. It depends because we're caching. The build graph is enormous. So in order to build Angular, you're probably going to need to build GCC, the C compiler in order to build protobuf after that, because we're using some protos to build some other pieces of the framework, and at certain point there might be a dependency on Java, so you may have to build the Java compiler. So if we don't have the persistent disk caching and like the remote cache that Angular provides, it may take, I don't know, like a few days to build Angular.
It's like the whole code basically, right?
Yeah, if you completely destroy the cache. Yeah. But usually someone has already built most of this for you, so you don't have to run your code build. That's the benefit.
One more. Sorry, Alexei. What about?
Go ahead.
What about this? I think like that in the demo they want to like re-implement TypeScript using Rust or something to make it faster.
This would be cool. Yeah, if they're
be employed, right, in some way, one way or another, right? This could help.
If they're able to keep up with the spec, this would be great. We have looked at some JavaScript compilers written in Rust already. We're just looking at them because it's not. We can obviously adopt them, and it's going to take us, I guess, like a week or two. But after that, if the maintainer of this compiler just decides to stop maintaining it, like this means that we should maintain the compiler ourselves, or we should break people.
Yeah, I see. But that could be like a way forward, right? Like, because this also takes like a lot of time of this whole build process. So if this would speed up, that's something which could happen in theory.
Definitely, yeah, that's definitely true. Yeah,
we will speak a bit about Dena plus Angular later on today. We have some related question to that, but now let's jump to the next question, which is how to bootstrap an Angular app with a minimum framework fingerprint, bundle size, runtime overhead, question mark. What is the use case for that using Angular elements?
Okay, yeah. Currently,
and I think this question pretty much like
it's similar, yeah.
Similar to Rustam question. So yeah, let's just try to answer these two in one go.
Sure.
The Rustam question is, what about Angular element size? Without Ivy, that's a lot by default. If use Ivy with private API, render component is kind of less, significantly less.
But there are some issues with it. So that's the question when like there will be a way to provide directives and pipes on components again, right?
Yeah. So yeah, this is related to also making ng modules optional. This is something that we have been talking about like for a couple of years, and since this is a kind of a major change, this is not something that we can like commit to a date yet. We are thinking about this actively because we think that ng modules are bringing some extra cost to the learning journey of people. And like actually, when I joined the Angular team in 2018. I joined in November 5th, and around November, the 20th of November, I opened a pull request to make ng modules optional. But like this was not something that the team could approve. Like I wasn't the first one who wanted to make ng modules optional. It's just not an easy problem to well, I mean, it's easy problem to solve, but there are a lot of different variables to consider. So we just want to consider all these variables and make the right decision with the right design. And I'm happy that we're taking this gradual approach with just because back then I implemented one solution. Right now we are on a different page, so we are considering something else. Anyway, about the distribution of Angular elements. Well, I guess what you're probably currently using with NGX Build Plus is our recommended solution. There are some other things you could potentially do. So this solution with NGX Build Plus is going to be using a UMD bundle, and all different elements on the page would be just using Angular from this UMD bundle. This would be a little bit costly depending on your requirements. I have talked to a lot of application developers, and for them, the 80 kilobytes of JavaScript that Angular core brings it's not terrible, especially after gzip. It's about 80K without reshaking. If this is, however, very a lot of weight for your app, what you could do is, and if you're sure which elements you'll be using at a certain page, you can just build them together so that you have a common chunk that represents all the pieces of Angular that these different Angular elements are using. This is a way for you to shrink the bundle like further, and still we have like dynamic versus static systems. See, because at build time, if you know at build time which elements you'll be using, you don't need the uncertainty, like the dynamic behavior of using on-demand pieces of Angular with the UMD bundle. But this is an assumption that you could have. Should have, yeah. So we will not be implementing any of these strategies in the Angular CLI. These are possible by using NGX Build Plus and custom Webpack configuration. I mean, not for now. Eventually, in the future.
Right.
Yeah, maybe like one thing to point out to that question is that this render component is basically already possible to use today and really get some minuscule little bundles. The only problem there is that when you basically pass a component into render component, you have a problem to use anything in the component template, like directives and pipes and other components. So this is kind of like the missing piece. Maybe, and then this ties into what Minko was saying about like making modules optional. But I think like I don't see it like either or, but probably even if modules are not, well, I mean, okay, if you just use it without, then it's optional. Okay, I see. I was just thinking like, yeah, if you would just like extend maybe like this API surface of add component decorator that you could pass in stuff in, that would kind of solve it. But I agree that that already means that it's the optional ng module, which, as you said, like brings with itself like all these other issues which are maybe not so obvious on the first look. So I guess we have to wait a bit. Yeah.
Yeah, we have proposal and we have excitement about optional ng modules. It's going to be on the roadmap.
And wasn't
it
like this in the past that it was possible to pass like the directives and stuff into component? It was like this.
Yeah, in RC4.
Yeah, okay. Exactly. Anyway, we will see in the future, hopefully.
Okay, let's jump to the next one. Why not integrate some state manager into the Angular core to make Zunup way more popular? ?
Yeah, that's a good point. So yeah, we have a long-term plan on how we can make Angular function well without zones. And as part of this project, we are also thinking of some kind of state management. Although if you think about it, like Angular currently has its state management, right? Everything which is in the state of component instance, you can bind to this and you can reflect changes in these properties in the view. We're thinking of making it a little bit more explicit, I guess. Still, when the time comes for this, we will be, well, first of all, you are hopefully going to see that in the public roadmap at first, and right after that, we will be sharing a design document so that everyone will be able to comment. But this is something that we're thinking about. Still, I cannot commit that this is going to be part of like any version right now, version 11 or version 10 or version 12, because we have time-based versioning. So every 6 months, we'll be releasing a new version, major version of Angular, but these roadmap items, they would not be coupled to any particular version. But however, you would see the burnout progress. You'll see how many of them we have completed and what is coming next.
Right.
Maybe again related to this, so basically there are like these couple of IV private methods which you already kind of can access, but like they're prefixed with this special character, right? And one of them is like mark dirty, if I think that this is kind of related to this kind of topic, right? So, and there was this idea that once IV is stable, that those things will be being unprivated or something like this, or?
I'm not aware of such plans, actually. Yeah, I don't know about such plans. Okay. It's I recently, like over the past like 2 years, I haven't heard such plans. Maybe, but I also heard some statements that everything that is prefixed with one theta would be released as public APIs sooner than things that are released with double theta. I don't know about such plans either.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe probably some of these APIs would be, but yeah.
Jump into the next one. It's like kind of 2 questions in one. So first part is scheduling DOM updates. Do not update items out of the screen. Interrupting updates at the fetch and responding to user action is an important feature. Is it possible to implement DOM updates scheduling with incremental DOM ?
Yeah, I love this question. Yeah, it's possible. So if you look at Michael Hlatsky's current work, what is he like pretty much researching in his spare time, we're collaborating with him actually on experimenting with different ways to do that. So you can definitely do that. I believe currently he has, so the browser, first of all, Chrome is working on a scheduling API, which would allow you to run different computations with different priority. This is something like a request animation frame, but it allows you to specify high, low, and medium priority for different tasks that you would want to invoke. Imagine you would want to render pieces that are outside of the viewport with lower priority, or you would want to just perform change detection there with lower priority. You can definitely do that, and you can actually do that even right now, maybe using some private APIs. Look at, was it called RX Angular?
Yes,
package by
RX-Angular. We can link it. We can link it in the description, guys, if you want to look at that.
It's a it's a really exciting, actually, community-driven effort. And as I mentioned, such experiments in this space, they could be really valuable and as an input to our future design, especially around thinking how we can implement Angular with optional zones or without zones. So if you experiment with these things and you see what works and what doesn't, you can provide your feedback during the RFC process once the time comes. And from there, we are going to consider the different designs. But just keep in mind that these solutions are using all private APIs, and we may break these APIs. I mean, I've been building tools for Angular for 5 years before I joined Google, and you can't imagine how many times I have been broken by changing private APIs, because that's what I was using. But still, a lot of exciting things you could build by using private APIs. So
yeah, but be careful. Don't...
yeah. Try it probably at home.
All right, next question. What are the plans for Angular material? What new components are coming?
So the biggest change right now is that we are working with the MDC team. They are implementing. So what we have had in Google for a while is different implementations of material design components, and all of them had to stay up to date with the spec. All of them had like same issues because or similar issues that different teams were fixing. So what we're doing right now is to reuse the web components built with MDC and wrap them as Angular components. And this seems to be the right level of abstraction to go to, because we have lower level of abstraction, which is like browser APIs. These are we're stepping on top of them and building Angular material components. So this is what the material team is currently focused on. This may have potentially some implications on end-to-end tests, especially if you rely that if you in your end-to-end tests you look into you have assertions which assume that your material components have particular structure. Well, this may break you because material components may have slightly different structure in the future. So I would encourage you to use the test harnesses that we currently have for material if you're building end-to-end tests.
All right, and that's the second part of the question. I mean, it's a separate question, but it's related. So yeah, MDC components versus Angular. Yeah, you just kind of mentioned that. Okay, what is the roadmap for that? Any ideas, like when's the production ready?
I think you can try an experimental version of 16 components, I think, if I'm not wrong. I believe there were in total, maybe 18. I believe in total there were 36. Anyway, you should be able to try an experimental version in CDK experimental, maybe. I can share a link after the presentation. I don't have the link right now on top of my head, but they are available for testing, I believe.
Right. Okay, let's jump to this one. Support for Yarn 2. When?
Yeah, so exciting thing. I believe the Angular CLI already supports Yarn 2, the Angular compiler already does, but NGCC does not. NGCC is this compatibility layer between Vue Engine and Ivy. And the good thing is that one of the top efforts that we have right now on the roadmap is to get rid of NGCC. And when we get rid of NGCC, we should have support for Yarn 2 as well.
Okay, the next question. What about official Angular plus Dena render server compiler API, etc.? Because in the first experiments, it seems that render Angular JIT with Dena is working 3 times faster than with Node. And that's, guys, what the author of this question refers to this experiment. So if someone wants to play with that, just head on this URL. But yeah, Minka, do you have any ideas on that?
Yeah, so Angular Universal originally was, and still actually, it's a mostly community-driven project. When I was in NG Vegas in 2015 or 2014, 2015, I would say. Patrick and Jeff, they just released the first working version of Angular Universal back then. So I would say that if you keep moving the Angular demo package further, and we see that this package is like bringing value to the Angular community, we would love to collaborate on making it a recommended solution. We don't have plans right now. We haven't invested in this because there are more urgent things on our roadmap. But this is definitely a good opportunity for community collaboration.
Right. Okay, sounds good. So the next question: what are the plans for supporting ESLint out of the box instead of TSLint? Will this transition affect existing projects?
Yeah. So we are using very heavily TSLint in Google. I did an evaluation like 6 months ago first, or a year ago, actually about a year ago first, to see what would be the path moving from TSLint to ESLint. Back then, it wasn't like a very bright path because of some performance regressions. Right now, things are better. Still, we have a lot of concerns about package size because ESLint has like a few times more dependencies compared to TSLint. And also, we want to make sure that what we're using in Google, we are also using externally, because this allows us to test that things work and be confident in our releases. So we are not going to be migrating to ESLint officially until we migrate inside of Google, because we want to be confident in our releases and that our tooling works properly. And to be confident, this means that, well, we can verify it with our 2,500 projects inside of Google. And yeah, that's pretty much the answer.
So
currently, yeah.
Sorry, go. Yeah, I just wanted to add, is there any, you think, timeline for that, or when people might expect this move? Sometime sooner or later in the future?
Yeah, so here we are. We have a TypeScript team in Google, which is this TypeScript team is evaluating right now ESLint, and whenever they make decision, we are going to follow up with them. I provided them with all the information I have, and they're all really good compiler and TypeScript experts, so I completely trust what's the decision they are going to make. And just an extra thing to say, you can use ESLint with the CLI right now with the third-party plugin, which James Henry developed. So feel free to, and it also has all the Collizer rules as well.
Right.
So they are all community-driven and developed, just like Collizer was on the first place.
Just maybe one thing to that, like to be aware that like for sure, like many companies also invested like in writing like their own, let's say, TS rules, right? So this would be something which there would be of consequence, even though I imagine that this should not be like a very hard to migrate, because this kind of works the same way. So it should not be that dramatically difficult to migrate these things, but this could introduce some additional migration efforts for like many consumers.
Yeah, definitely good point. Yeah, also not deprecations, but suppressions, comment suppressions. It's very hard to migrate them as well from TSLint to ESLint. So it seems like an easy thing. You just flip a flag, but it has a lot of underlying costs, like mostly performance, runtime performance, API compatibility, which is pretty much incompatible, suppressions, which is part of the public API. It has also package costs, and like folks could say we can definitely use schematics to migrate. We can. There are some things which we could migrate and many other things that we cannot. It's hard to judge exactly, given that we have over 150 rules and we should evaluate their semantics.
Right. So seems like we shouldn't expect it to happen quite soon.
Yeah.
Okay, the next one. What are the plans of adding observable lifecycle hooks?
Yeah, no plans for this either. This is, again, relates to the more reactive versus less reactive. So there are community projects again, which are touching some of the internal API data structures, internal Ivy data structures, and they are doing this. I would say that I'm relying on these internal Ivy data structures quite a lot as well, and it's not impossible to keep this working, but you need to have a CI that keeps up to date with Angular. So yeah. This is not something that we'll be investing in the near future because we want to make sure that we don't introduce RxJS in the critical journey for people who are getting started with the framework.
Right. So the next one, why does Svelte have more hype than Angular Ivy?
Yeah, good question. It's hard for me to judge about this. I guess maybe we didn't do our job well enough to communicate what Angular has to provide.
It seems to me actually Angular Ivy was having enough hype inside Angular community, right? But outside Angular community, no one much know about Angular Ivy, especially, about Angular Ivy, and lots of people thinking about outside Angular community, they thinking of Angular as it is AngularJS. So they still think of this old AngularJS, badly performant framework, big and slow, right? No, not cool. So, but really, it's not a real situation. So, and yes, that's basically the problem, in my opinion.
Yeah, we can. What we could do, I guess, is just to talk more about what Angular has to provide and like educate people. That's the best we could do.
Yep.
For sure, we could probably be more active in social media. So this is something that we can think about. For example, I see that frequently our I-89 is very misunderstood, our I-89 strategy. And it's actually very well thought out. Like there are a lot of design documents and it is aligned exactly with how I-89 is done in Google. So I guess if we just communicate this well enough, people would probably understand the reasoning.
Right.
With that one in particular, probably people are just like used from the past experience to have like a runtime language switching. So then they see this for the first time, like, oh no. And they like, because it's like this knee-jerk reaction, like I always did it this way, so no. And even though it has benefits, right? Like I saw your tweet like lately that because of that you can check the translations, all these cool things. But then like first reaction, like no. And then like NGX translate quick, like
yeah. It was the same with TypeScript as well, right? Like people were thinking, oh, what are you doing with this TypeScript thing? Like, why are you introducing it as part of the framework? Like, it doesn't make sense. And now I like pretty much everyone wants to use TypeScript.
Yeah, have you seen the downloads count on NPM? It's just insane on TypeScript.
Yeah, recently one of the engineers shared that. One of the engineers working on TypeScript shared that TypeScript took off because of Angular, which was like really good recognition for us to hear. In fact, the Angular team was working very closely with TypeScript originally. Angular was written with something called AdScript, which was Angular, which was pretty much ES 2015-ish like language with runtime type checking, which was maintained by the Angular team. And there was a collaboration with the TypeScript team on introducing decorators in the language because, well, that was the right path. And I'm happy that we were able to introduce this good practice.
Interesting thing. As far as I know, Google doesn't allow TypeScript decorators in the code except Angular decorators, right?
It doesn't allow you to use to declare custom decorators.
So, but like it means like the reason why, because it's experimental, the subject of change. So if you introduce too much decorators, you might need to support them in if like going forward. And if there's any breaking change, you need to address that. Or what's the problem with the custom decorators?
Yeah, in general, in Angular, it's possible. Actually, I'm currently participating in a lot of these 39 discussions on decorators because decorators, they're not standardized yet. A lot of different people want to standardize them. There is representation from Mobex, from Aurelia, from Ember, from many other parties, many other like from Node.js. So they may change a little bit, but it's not going to be because decorators are widely used. Hopefully, they're not going to change much. But at the same time, with decorators, if you can misuse them really well, you can do really bad things with decorators and de-optimize the source code that the JavaScript virtual machine executes. However, in Angular, we're using them only in order to attach metadata, and we're mostly using them at build time. So they don't exist actually at runtime. So this is not a concern for Google since they don't add any overhead and they have really well-defined scope. That's why they're allowed. One of the reasons.
Right. Okay. Cool. So the next one, how to make Angular more popular.
Yeah, we can. I really like our approach in our community that we're really friendly towards other technologies and we're just sharing what you could achieve with Angular. So just keeping this approach and like keep being open about other ideas and like sharing the benefits that Angular provides. That's the way I see it. But in general, I'm also not a marketing person. I'm mostly an engineer, although right now I'm doing some other things as well. But yeah, if there are better suggestions, I would really love to hear them. Although I believe we have pretty decent popularity, right? If you look at the Angular language service, it has over 1.5 million downloads, and this is only for VS Code. So there are 1.6 million VS Code engineers using VS Code that have installed the Angular language service. And these are only people using VS Code. So there are other people who are using WebStorm, and WebStorm does not use the VS Code language service extension. There are many people using Sublime and many other text editors and IDEs. So I guess Angular is decently popular, but definitely we can always make it more popular.
Yeah, actually, I have this screen open right now. So let's see the stats on Angular and comparing with other frameworks, right? So here we have GitHub, Stack Overflow, community, and docs visits. So yeah, GitHub is number 3 by number of stars. Stack Overflow answers, it's number 2. Actually, last year, a couple of months ago, on Stack Overflow, Angular was first by number of questions, and now React take over, which is interesting. So community, as you can see, this community starts by from data from meetup.com. So yeah, Angular is kind of first. We have the biggest community, seems like, and doc sites visits. Yeah, kind of. I don't know how much this data is actually accurate.
Yeah, it doesn't look accurate for Angular.
Coming from site rankdata.com, so I'm not sure where they're taking this data, but yeah.
I'm looking at Google Analytics reports right now. It doesn't look accurate. I don't know how they define those visits, but anyway, that's a way to measure that. One way.
And the interesting thing here, like npm downloads, Vue finally overtook Angular last month, I think, or this month, by a couple of 100,000 downloads. But yeah, who cares about npm downloads, right? We need to look at the whole picture. So we need to look at everything to make our decisions, right? What is popularity? But really, should we care about popularity at all? Like what's okay if like React is most popular framework, right? What does it mean for us?
That's the one thing there, like to point out that it's always like contextual. So like in which context is, because like, okay, like if you take like the Twitter and it's like who is vocal about or something like this, then okay, it would skew the like whole picture, or like the npm downloads, right? Many organizations, very large organizations, which thousands of developers, they have their nexuses, right? So it also depends like for which group, and which group is more in the open and which group is not so in the open, to put like some context to that. So then maybe on what is the most open, it looks like this, but if you dig a bit deeper, then it would look totally different, right?
That's a good point. Yeah, I would have to run in a little bit. I have a meeting starting now.
Right. Okay. I think that's all pretty much. So we have last question here, but yeah, if you have a time for that.
I can answer this question as well. I can do
So
a little bit later.
How other developers can help Angular development and community overall? Let's have an answer later, maybe via text tweet or something, right? Something like that.
Yeah, I will do that. Yeah, that's a good point. It will require more thought from myself as well. I can share my personal experience.
Awesome, great. Thank you, Minko, for joining us, and thank you, Thomas, as well. So it was great meetup, and yeah, good luck. See you later, guys.
Thank you for having us. Ciao, guys. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone who attended today. So again, I just want to remind it was our birthday meetup, so anniversary meetup, and we're gonna play the. Let me show the screen. We're gonna, as I mentioned before, we have these prizes: JetBrains 1-year license and Quokka personal license. So, guys. What I want to say, please comment. This document. Some of you were put your questions because as we collected most of the questions, so there wasn't much questions been asked personally in a private chat. So, guys, please put your name in this document. Just to remind you, so this document you were. Put your questions. So just comment here your name against the question. Say if this was your question, please comment it, like put your name here, blah, blah, blah. So this way we would know, or actually put your email or something we can actually reach you out, right? If you be a winner, so we can actually find out if by email or something we can reach you out. You can put your email, name, or I don't know, Twitter handle, Telegram name, right? So just mark your name against your question, please, so we can actually reach you out if you choose a question. So yeah, thanks everyone who joined today. Thomas, are you still here?
Yeah.
So yeah, thanks for you for a great presentation. It was awesome. Thank you everyone who joined us today, and yeah, we continue doing meetups next month as we promised.
Wish you all the best for your next years, for the next anniversaries. Ciao.
Yeah, thanks. Hopefully we see you in the next anniversary as well as a speaker. And I hope it won't be an online event. It should be like offline event, right?
Thank you for having me. Bye-bye. Good night.
All right. Bye, Thomas. So yeah, guys, if you haven't subscribed to our channel, subscribe to channel, join our Telegram, and yeah, thanks a lot.